Section 21 of Richelieu by Joseph Gustave Masson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Pamela Nagami. Chapter 7, The University of Paris, the Jesuits in the Collège of France, Philosophy and Erudition, Part 3. There is no doubt that if Lamotte Leveillé, Gabriel Naudet, and Guy Patin had thought proper to utter publicly their metaphysical and religious opinions, they would have been put to death. Giordano Bruno and Lucilio Vanini were sent to the stake for holding views not a whit bolder than those which we find in the dialogues of Touberon and in the Masquerades. Campanella remained for the space of 27 years in the dungeons of the Inquisition, and we all know what was the fate of the astronomer Galileo. Not only was penal legislation applied to cases of every kind, it was also enforced with a degree of brutality which reminds us of the worst times of the Middle Ages. One fact amongst a whole list of others must be detailed here, because it serves to illustrate both the character of Richelieu's administration and also the ignorance and superstition of the times. We mean the melancholy history of Urbain Grandier. A canon of the church of Sainte-Croix at Loudun in Poitou. This clergyman had the misfortune of being accused of having published a political pamphlet against Richelieu. Now this was one of the offences which the cardinal never forgave. Under the title La Cordonnière de Loudun, a lampoon had been circulated during the time of the new prime minister's quarrels with the Queen Dowager Marie de Medici. It was hardly supposed then that Richelieu would ever reach the extraordinary power he subsequently enjoyed, and everyone believed that the temporary interest excited by the Cordonnière had entirely disappeared. Urbain Grandier, however, had contrived, in addition to this offence, to excite against himself influential and bitter enemies. His superior talents inspired with jealousy the clergy of Loudun. His powers of sarcasm, imprudently exercised against those who had incurred his displeasure, were never forgotten by his victims. In short, he had to pay the penalty of unexampled popularity. He was remarkably good-looking, hence serious charges which affected his moral character, and although ultimately found innocent, yet he remained under a shadow of suspicion. At that time Laubardemont, one of Richelieu's agents, arrived in Loudun for the purpose of seeing that the fortifications erected by the Huguenots were duly and completely destroyed. Received with great pomp by the inhabitants of the town, and sumptuously entertained by the municipal authorities, Laubardemont frequently heard the name of Urbain Grandier mentioned, and discovered on inquiry that he was the reputed author of the once famous pamphlet La Cordonnière de Loudun. He saw at once in that circumstance an excellent opportunity of ingratiating himself with the cardinal, and Richelieu was immediately informed that Urbain Grandier, a lax clergyman, generally supposed to be a great favourite with the ladies, held likewise very unsound opinions about the Cardinal Ministre. Just then a report spread abroad that extraordinary things were occurring within the walls of the Ursuline convent, which till that time had not attracted public notice. Strange noises were heard at night. Shrieks and sobs interrupted the usual quiet of the place. Apparitions were seen, and finally it was solemnly and seriously asserted that the nuns, through the means of Urbain Grandier, had become possessed of the devil. Richelieu, hearing of this, saw what advantage it gave to him to get rid of the obnoxious pamphlet writer, and he ordered a searching investigation to be made of the case connected with the Ursuline nuns. A long and wearisome trial took place, most unjustly conducted, and with the evidently deliberate purpose of sentencing to death the unfortunate Grandier. The most futile charges were made, and the most absurd depositions taken as conclusive. The enemies of the accused were glad to remove him out of the way. Finally, he was declared guilty of magic and sorcery on the 18th of August, 1634, and was sentenced to be burned alive. Laubardemont has earned an unenviable notoriety by his blind devotedness to Richelieu, and by the scandalous animosity he displayed in the course of Urbain Grandier's trial. "That Jean Martin de Laubardemont," says the genealogist Dozier, "is the unjust judge whom the late Cardinal Richelieu appointed to try the unfortunate Urbain Grandier, and condemn him to be burnt alive under the horrible pretext that he was a sorcerer, and that he had corrupted the nuns of Loudun, but really because he looked upon him as the author of a satirical pamphlet on the Cardinal's birth." Efforts had been made by various persons in the beginning of the year 1634 to have the case tried again, but Laubardemont and Richelieu would not tolerate this course, and on the 31st of May in the same year an order appeared expressly prohibiting the Parliament and all the other courts in the kingdom from further interference in the case, and the defendants from appealing under penalty of a fine of 500 livres. Laubardemont, it is well known, kept Richelieu au courant of the various incidents in the trial, and the day after the execution he wrote to the Cardinal a letter which has been handed down to us, and which the reader will find printed in the BIOGRAPHY universelle. After the most absurd and fulsome eulogies addressed to Richelieu on his religious zeal, and more especially his success in the conversion of the Huguenots, Laubardemont goes on to say, "Knowing the greatness of your eminence, so far as I can venture to do so in my low estate, I have taken as my aim the restoration to the Church of all the heretics in this kingdom. After the sight of the manifest miracles which you have accomplished, they will need only the command of the sovereign to return to the bosom of their mother, whose arms are always open to receive them. But what, my lord, I venture perhaps too far, and beyond the terms of my commission. Be pleased to forgive my zeal and the ardent desire I have for your glory. You give us every day fresh cause to admire your virtue, and I cannot help putting up my personal prayers to heaven for the success of your administration. If it is agreeable to you, my lord, that I should speak of the present case, I shall tell your eminence that we have lived here in great order and quiet, and with such union that it seemed as if we were all animated by the same spirit. In all these matters we have been of one opinion, and even when the sentence had to be given, it passed unanimously. Each of these 14 gentlemen stated his reasons with so much cogency that nothing was said on that occasion which would not have been worth your hearing. Nay, the Lieutenant General of Chinon has proved to us by this action that he possesses qualities far above the ordinary strength of his youth. He is, I assure you, my lord, a most worthy subject, and fully deserves to be nominated to some high office which may bring him near the king and your eminence." This letter, of which we have only quoted the latter half, is particularly interesting as an example both of Laubardemont's servility and of the style in which Richelieu was addressed by his agents, the Laffemasses, the Séguiers, etc., etc., insolent and bullying toward their master's victims, fawning in their conduct toward the master himself. Grandier suffered his punishment with the most unflinching courage, and his death now remains on record as a monument not only of Richelieu's spite, but also of the superstition which, in a comparatively enlightened age, still prevailed amongst the intellectual classes of society. It seems perfectly clear that the nuns of Loudun were the victims of a kind of hysteria similar to that which seized upon the Convulsionnaires, who 100 years later brought such discredit upon the cause of Jansenism. Some authors have asserted that the whole of this melancholy episode was a mere comedy, based upon the grossest lies, and the object of which was to satisfy the animosity of Cardinal Richelieu. We cannot accept this explanation. The minister, no doubt, took advantage of an incident which chance placed in his way, but that was all. Grandier's death is not the only event of the kind which the 17th century has on record. Before him a priest of the name of Gaufridi had met with the same fate, and no political motive in his case could be brought forth as a justification or an explication. After the catastrophe we have just been relating, similar scenes of hysteria occurred at Chinon. Two priests, Santerre and Gilloire, were suspected of witchcraft, and they narrowly escaped being sent to the stake. One fact is placed beyond demonstration, namely, that Urbain Grandier's chief persecutors died in the most tragic manner shortly after the condemnation of their victim. A Capuchin friar named Lactance, who had with his own hand set fire to the funeral pyre, was seized with an attack of demopathy within the month, and died on the 18th of September. A surgeon of the name of Montnouri had likewise been very instrumental in Grandier's tortures. One evening, as he was returning from seeing a patient, he was suddenly struck by a kind of hallucination, which made him believe that the ghost of the unfortunate victim stood before him. It was with some difficulty that his friends took him home, and a few days afterwards he expressed himself fully persuaded that the apparition was haunting him wherever he went. As for Laubardemont, we cannot do better than translate the following letter by Guy Patin. On the 9th of this month, at 9 o'clock in the evening, a carriage was attacked by thieves. The noise accompanying the assault made the bourgeois come out of their houses, excited as much by curiosity as by charity. Shots were exchanged. One of the thieves was knocked down, and a servant belonging to their party arrested. The others took to flight. The wounded man died the next day, without saying a word, without complaining, and without declaring who he was. He has at last been identified. It is known that he was the son of a maître des requêtes named Laubardemont, who condemned to death in 1634 the poor curé of Loudun, Urbain Grandier, and had him burned alive, under the pretext that he had caused the devil to enter into the bodies of the Loudun nuns. Those poor women were taught to dance in order that fools might be persuaded that they were really possessed. Is this not a punishment from heaven sent into the family of that wicked judge as a kind of expiation for the cruel and merciless death of a poor priest, whose blood calls for vengeance from above? Laubardemont himself, although promoted by Richelieu to important offices, was so universally despised that after his patron's death he sank into obscurity and died forgotten in 1653. It was high time that a vigorous attempt should be made both to clear away the last vestiges of medieval philosophy, and also to raise a powerful barrier against the encroachments of scepticism. To have accomplished this desirable result was the glory of René Descartes, 1596 to 1650. And it is not too much to say that he is by far the most illustrious man of the Richelieu era. Instead of living amongst books like La Motte l'Eveillé and Gabriel Naudet, he communed with his own thoughts, and preferred solitude to the distracting vicissitudes of an active life. Not indeed that he had always secluded himself from the society of his fellow creatures, or refused to play his part in the stirring scenes of the early 17th century, for we find him completing his imperfect education by travels in foreign climes, and serving as a soldier, first in Germany under Maurice of Nassau and the Duke of Bavaria, and then at the siege of La Rochelle. But when he had once directed his attention to the obscure question of metaphysics, he saw the absolute necessity of avoiding the conflicts of public opinion, and of not allowing himself to be biassed by the numerous systems which outbid one another for popularity. Both in philosophy and in literature, Descartes was essentially a reformer. As a mere writer, he deserves to be noticed, because he composed in French and not in Latin. His principal work, the Discours de la Méthode, Leyden, 1637. He felt conscious both of the importance of the task he had undertaken, and of the influence it was destined to exercise. He addressed himself not to the comparatively small circle of scholars, but to the larger audience of readers, whose only pretensions were that they possessed the gift of common sense, the quality, he remarks, which is the most fairly divided and the most naturally equal amongst all men. He adds further on, "If I write in French, which is the language of my native country, rather than in Latin, which is that of my teachers, it is because I hope that those persons who make use solely of their natural reason will appreciate better my opinions than those who pin their faith to ancient books." End of Section 21.